As we're about halfway through the year, here's a recap of the rarest and most memorable birds of 2024 so far. And it started with this bird. The first one we got on film was on New Year's Day. It was a common scouter. On the same day we were lucky enough to get this long-tailed duck at Morfa Madryn Nature Reserve in North Wales. January continued with this black-throated diver. This individual we'd seen at the tail end of 2023, and luckily it stuck around just into 2024. Carrying on with the waterfowl, here's a beautiful male smew. Although at a bit of a distance, gave us reasonable views, which is more than I can say for the next duck that was at quite a distance. This red-crested pochard was at Top Hill Low Nature Reserve in Yorkshire. Slightly closer to home, in Lancashire, there was a couple of rare waterfowl at the same place. The first, although looks a bit like a Canada goose, is the much smaller Richardson's cackling goose. This wonderful little goose species from America was tricky to pick out, but we finally saw it at the opposite side of a pool. At the same location there was another American waterfowl that was visiting, this time a duck, a green-winged teal. This species is very similar to the Eurasian teal, except for a slight plumage difference. The Eurasian teal has a horizontal white line along the edge of its wing, whereas the American green-winged teal has a vertical white line stretching from its shoulder to its tummy. The rarities continued as I went on a work trip to Cornwall, finding a couple of reasonably good species nearby, including a very confiding Bonaparte's gull, another visitor from America, and a bit of a surprise for winter, a golden oriole. This reasonably young bird was flying around a housing estate. This species is rare enough in the summer, so really unusual to find at this time of year. Excellent. Next came a very special duck that we'd seen previously, this time showing up on the Wirral not too far from where we live. It's an American widgeon, but no ordinary American widgeon, which is rare enough in its own right, but an interesting and even more scarce mutation, a storm widgeon. These have primarily white heads as opposed to grey, but continue with their iridescent blue-green eye stripe. One of the key birds, and one of my favourites that was a winter visitor this year in quite large numbers, was the waxwing. This colourful species visits the UK in small numbers most years, but occasionally there are winters which are nicknamed waxwing winters, where they come in huge numbers due to food shortages and their normal wintering grounds. Now on to another American visitor, and this one which has stuck around for a long time. It's a wading bird called the lesser yellowlegs. This individual has been at Frampton Marsh in Lincolnshire for a number of months, and has given many people awesome sightings as it's quite confiding and will come reasonably close. We've seen it on multiple occasions and it never fails to entertain, one of my favourites. Now on to some slightly scarcer British birds, like these common crane. We saw this group at a place called Eldonell. We'd been to see some owls that were roosting, and the cranes were a lovely surprise. The next species is a British bird, although its breeding range doesn't usually come as far north as us, so the sightings here are usually in the winter, and so was this one, a female black redstart. It's a species I'd never seen in the UK, and it was also a lifer for Kaylee. The next bird, also reasonably close to home, was an Iceland gull, and a subspecies called the Coomlean's gull. This bird showed up in Widnes on Merseyside. It wasn't the only rare gull I saw in Widnes this winter, but that one's a little later on in the video. Moving back onto waterfowl, an American visitor that's becoming a little bit more numerous in this country, the ringneck duck. This was a distant view of a female. The next duck is considerably rarer. In fact, it's considered a mega in this country. That's the Bayakal teal. This species breeds in eastern Siberia and winters in the far east of China, Japan and South Korea. So one this far west is pretty unusual. This individual showed up at Grey Lake RSPB in Somerset. Crazily, we had seen a Baikal teal the previous year in North Wales, and I believe this is probably the same bird. Although spending much of its time preening, it did come out in the open a couple of times, giving us pretty great views. Now back to some gulls, starting off with a large winter visitor. This is a juvenile glaucous gull. This species is an Arctic circle breeder, with some small numbers visiting the UK in winter. And now for another gull, but a little one. Yes, a little gull. This species being a winter visitor too, with its nearest breeding colony being in Norway. We picked this individual up on a little boating lake in Gloucestershire. The next one being a bit of a rarity, a snow goose. This visitor from across the Atlantic comes in two colour forms, the white morph and the blue morph, which this individual is, with primarily blue-grey plumage apart from the head. This individual did a little bit of a tour around Lancashire and North Wales and settled for a while in a place not that far from where we live called Clypools. Briefly, I've got to return back to gulls and a species we've already seen on the list, but this one was pretty special as I didn't know it was present when I arrived. It's another glaucous gull, but this time an adult. This was at the recycling centre in Widnes. I'd gone to try and find the Coomleens gull again and hoped to possibly see a Caspian gull, which I'm still yet to see this year. Moving on to some smaller perching birds now, and a trip to Budby Common in Nottinghamshire produced, after quite a long walk, this awesome great grey shrike. This species was once a nemesis bird of mine, and a lifer for Kaylee too. And now to a mega rare bird, but to quite a surreal backdrop. A long drive up to a suburban housing estate on the west coast of Scotland gave us unbelievable views of a very rare myrtle warbler, an American songbird. This is a subspecies of the yellow-rumped warbler, and it's the first time this species has been seen on the UK mainland for 10 years, the last one being on the east coast in County Durham. We followed some other birders into the garden to watch this confiding little bird jumping around in the vegetation at the other side of the garden fence, occasionally coming down to the fence itself and onto the bird feeders in the garden to eat. This was an unbelievable experience and a highlight of this year so far. Whilst we were in Scotland, we did nip to Troon Harbour and got some awesome views of black guillemot. Moving south to the north of England now, and this time to Cumbria. In the car park of a National Trust castle, there had been some hawfinch sighted. Although a British breeding bird, one that's pretty scarce and also very timid, and a species that Kaylee had seen as a kid and had not seen since. She was over the moon. Staying in Cumbria, a very mundane looking bird but a rarity nevertheless, a Richard's pipit. This one was in a field in Ulverston. It took us 2 attempts to find it, and with the help of another birder we got some reasonable views. At a distance unfortunately, but still a stunning bird. Moving briefly back to ducks, and a trip to Leighton Moss RSPB in North Lancashire gave us really close views of not just one but a pair of lesser scaup. These American visitors are not drastically different from our resident greater scaup, although they are a little smaller, slenderer and have slightly different shaped head. Moving closer to home now to Burton Mere wetlands on the Wirral. A visit here produced some very distant views of a pair of ruddy shelduck. A trip to Norfolk gave us a sighting of this long-billed dowitcher, an American wader, one that I had actually seen before, but still wonderful to see, and this one being, let me pronounce it right, at Cly Marshes. Staying down south, but this time at Ham Wall in Somerset, gave us views of not just one, but multiple of this species, glossy ibis. This species, with scattered breeding populations throughout South and Eastern Europe, has expanded its range recently, with increased visits to the UK, one pair even successfully bred in 2022. And now for another mega. This is a Forster's tern, an American visitor. We saw this individual last year at RSPB Arn in Dorset, but then it disappeared for the winter. Whilst we were on a trip to Somerset, it was reported again, so we jumped in the car and hot-footed it back to Arn, and we got there in time to get some reasonable views. Now, continuing down south to a very special bird for me. This is a surl bunting, and this footage was from the second time I'd seen one, but this year the first one was a lifer. This bird's so important to me due to a late friend called Malcolm Lee. He led a young ornithologists club of which I was a member. I remember him sending me a postcard after a trip to Devon. The postcard read, "Seen the surl bunting in the car park, lifer." I've wanted to see this species since. I did get a brief view in Somerset, which is the first time I'd seen one. This footage though was from a car park in Devon. But we weren't here for the surl buntings on this occasion, we were here for the next bird. Another bunting, but a much rarer one, the little bunting. This species breeds in boreal and snow forest in northern Russia and winters in Southeast Asia, but small numbers do occasionally turn up in the UK, and this one was very confiding. It fed with the other buntings and gave us great views. It's definitely one of my birds of the year. Although we've seen pretty much every species of UK owl this year, we can't include them all in the video. This one I decided to keep in because it was so cool. This little owl was sat in the rocks at Portland Bill in Dorset, and whilst I was lay on the floor because of the wind trying to get some steady footage, it looked straight at me. The next bird is very close to home, within about 10 minutes from where we live. We're lucky enough to be very close to this Schedule 1 red listed species. These are black grouse. The males of this incredible, charismatic species get together in the mornings in the early part of the year to lek. This is where they assert a dominance hierarchy, with the ones towards the middle of the lek being the ones most likely to get the mates. Moving on to another bird, which was a lifer for Kaylee, and one she didn't realise was stood behind her where she was sat on a bench at RSPB Saltholm, the greater white-fronted goose, or sometimes called the Russian white-fronted goose, to differentiate it from the Greenland subspecies. Continuing in the northeast, but this time South Gare on Teesside, we saw this distant view of a red-necked grebe as it fished in the estuary on a very, very cold morning. This is the first time we'd seen an adult of this species. The next bird, an amazingly charismatic bird and one I didn't expect to see at Spurn in East Yorkshire. This is the bearded tit, or sometimes called the bearded reedling. Now another highlight of the year. We both saw it when we were on our big birding day in May. This is a stunning male hen harrier. Whilst we were birding near where we live in North Wales, this individual flew in front of us hunting for prey, and it was the first male of this species that either of us had ever seen. The next species has a little bit of history for me. It's a sparrow-sized songbird from North America, the dark-eyed junco. It was the first rare bird I saw as a teenager. One turned up in northwest England, in Chester, where I grew up, and I went to see it in someone's garden in 1998. That individual was a youngster. This one is an adult, and it showed up in Hartlepool, in between a couple of people's gardens. What an incredible sight. The next bird, not an American visitor, but a European visitor, one that breeds in the south of Europe. This lovely bird is a woodchat shrike, and this individual is a female. It showed up in Lincolnshire. After persistently waiting for a few hours for it to actually show, it finally did and gave us some really nice views. This is one of Kaylee's favourite birds of the year. A trip to Anglesey gave us a few different species, including this Mediterranean gull. This isn't the only species we caught on this trip to Camlin. 2 yellow wagtail, but slightly rarer subspecies, with firstly the blue-headed wagtail, this being more common in central and southwestern Europe. Alongside this blue-headed wagtail there was a grey-headed form as well, this being more commonly seen in northernmost Europe, mainly Scandinavia. This was amazing to see both of them in the same field in Wales. The next species isn't particularly rare, it's a British breeding bird, although it is red listed due to its decline in numbers, its highest breeding densities being in Wales. Regardless of this, until this year a bird I hadn't seen. That's the wood warbler. Now on to something very special, a nocturnal bird that does breed in the UK but you don't see too often. That's the nightjar. We've been lucky to see them a couple of times, once at Fredericks Mount in Suffolk and again in the New Forest recently. A real special bird for me this year, the Dartford warbler. This is again a British breeding bird, but it's got a very limited range. And also, I have to say, one of my favourite warblers to watch. At the same location, which is Westleton Heath, we got stunning views of stone curlew, also called Eurasian thickney. These birds are very localised and summer visitors to the UK. Last time we did see them at a distance, but this year we had some amazing views. Leaving the south coast behind and moving up to the northeast now. Firstly to Northumberland. This little piece of coast has had repeat visits from an American visitor, a black tern, but the American subspecies. This individual summered here for a few years and on this occasion has paired up with an Arctic tern and even laid an egg. I doubt it'll hatch, but amazing anyway. On the same trip we took a boat over to Coquette Island, which is famous for seabirds, especially puffins and the rare roseate tern, but on this occasion it was being visited by a bridled tern. This is a mega rare bird and a species that should be in tropical waters. We got brief and shaky views, but regardless of this, it's a fantastic bird to add to our life list and our year list too. Moving south to Wiltshire, and this time to Salisbury Plain, gave us some pretty distant but amazing views of a species that's being reintroduced there, the great bustard. This huge bird is amongst the heaviest flying birds in the world, and we were lucky enough to get a view of both a male and a female, with significant heat haze, but hey, what an amazing sight. And on now to our most recent video, a trip I took into Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire, with lovely and close views of wood sandpiper, a bird that only breeds in very small numbers in Scotland and is usually only seen on passage. And the next one, not great views, see if you can pick it out in the video, but this was a black winged pratincoll, a rare bird globally but really scarce in the UK, and one that was flying around some flooded fields on the border of Nottinghamshire and Yorkshire. What an absolute treat. And our most recent addition to our year list. It's been a brilliant year so far and we've seen quite a few different species, some we'd never seen before. And we've got to the point where we're not far away from our target, but now is when things get harder and harder and are relying on a few ones we've missed and rarities showing up. We are now at 223 birds out of our 240 bird target. Unfortunately, we won't have a video out next week, but that's because we're doing a little foreign trip. And of course, we'll do some birding, so look out for that in a couple of weeks. Thanks so much for watching. Please like, please subscribe, and please press the notification bell. See you on the next adventure.